born, he was born at just under 3.5 pounds. And within the first day, like a lot of children, they lose a little bit of weight after they're born. And Paul had actually dropped down to under 2 pounds within the first 24 hours that he was born. And he had a lot of health issues, and so he had a situation where he had to be in the hospital. It was easily for him to get dehydrated. So he was in the hospital one time, and he couldn't have been any more than 1.5 years, maybe 2 years of age. And he was in the hospital, and we're finding this all out the next day after we go visit. And the staff comes up and says, "We have to tell you what happened last night." The nurse is walking by Paul's room. And in Paul's room, he's standing up and he's got all the wires and everything else. And all of a sudden the nurse hears, "Lady! Lady!" The nurse peeked in and said, "Yes." He goes, "Read me a story." Well, that was our habit around the house. Before they went to bed, we read them a nighttime story. And she goes, "Well, okay." So she found a book and she sat down and she read him a story. Well, after she read him a story, he fell off to sleep, like was his practice. And the next morning we find out about this. And it was the talk of the children's ward at the hospital that Paul did this. And it's one of those things that as you look back on our story of raising our family, that's one of the stories that seems to come up time and time again. But we're going to talk about our story, the story. And you might think, well, why in the world are we going to do a story? Why in the world are we going to just go through and tell the stories of the Bible? Don't we know them? We've learned about them. For those of us who have been in church all of our lives, it's like it's no big deal. We've heard these stories time and time again. And yet I listen over the past few months as the women would talk about their experience in their Wednesday night Bible study, and they said, some of these stories, some of these things in the stories may be a sub-story we never knew before, or we hadn't even thought about that before. And it's so exciting to be able to see that. People who have heard these stories and learned these stories, and all of a sudden, it's like, wow. It's almost like their eyes are opened again to the new excitement of the stories. Now, that's the reason why we're going to do what we do over the next number of weeks. We're going to talk about the story. And if you're beginning to think, well, that's okay. We're okay. We understand. We know where the stories are. Let me just kind of give you a clue that maybe we don't know much about the stories as we think we do. Acacia, let's play a little Jeopardy, shall we?
That leaves one untouched category, the Bible. Cindy, where would you like to begin?
Okay, I'll take the Bible for 200.
For 200, the answer is Genesis. Yes, Jerry.
What is the name of the device used to create a planet in that Star Trek movie?
No. I'm sorry, that's incorrect. Yes, Cindy.
What is the name of Phil Collins' band?
No, I'm sorry, that's also incorrect. No, players, remember the category is the Bible.
My buzzer's still not working.
Press firmly, Ron. Correct response. What is the first book of the Bible? Genesis, the very first book of the Bible. Throw open the cover, there it is. All right. Cindy, still your board.
Okay, I'll take the Bible for 400.
For 400, the answer is, it's one of the 10 commandments. Yes, Cindy?
What is freedom of speech?
No. That would be the Bill of Rights. Yes, Jeremy?
What is thou shalt not do anything?
Judges, can we accept that? No, I'm sorry. Can you be a bit more specific, please?
What is thou shalt not commit forgery?
No. No. I'm sorry. Ron? Well, there are 10 of them you could have picked from. No other gods, keep the Sabbath, honor your mother and father, no adultery.
I meant that one.
Yes, I'm sure you did. Cindy? Still your board.
I'll take the Bible for 600.
For 600, the answer is, they're called epistles. Yes, Jeremy?
What was Jesus' crown made out of?
No. Yes, Cindy?
What is the wife of an apostle?
No, that's incorrect. You? Correct response, what is a letter from an apostle? Letter from an apostle. Cindy, still your board.
Okay, I will take...
Only 2 clues remaining, Cindy.
Okay, I'll take the Bible for 800.
For 800, the answer is, all right, listen to me very carefully. Ron, listen to me very carefully. This person took 2 of every living animal into a huge boat to survive the Great Flood. Cindy.
Who is Mr. Doolittle?
No. Yes, Jeremy.
Who is Dr. Doolittle?
No. Yes. Yes,
It
Ron.
worked. That doesn't work.
Yes, Ron, but yes, go ahead.
Who is John of Arc?
No. No, it was Noah. Have you never heard of Noah? 2 by 2, the animals came. Well, that sound means it's time for our final round.
And we laugh about that. And rightfully so. I don't know how many times I've watched that. And they still crack up. But yet I can remember we had a dinner at church a number of years ago, and we were kind of doing a Bible trivia type thing. And the question that seemed to stump about 3/4 of the group that was here, I said, how many animals did Moses take onto the ark? And pretty much everybody said 2. And then somebody said, wait a minute, Moses didn't go on the ark, Noah did. I thought, okay, maybe those answers aren't as far-fetched as I would like to think that they are. The story. What do we look at? We take a look at our story in life, and we see all the events going on all around the world. We look at what's happening in Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan and North Korea, and we get closer to home and we look at gas prices and we look at price gouging, and we start to ask ourselves, when we look at our world, why is all of this happening? Why is all of this going on? Why is all this evil going on in the world? Why are people treating each other the way that we are right now? And we ask ourselves those questions, and we wonder, we turn on a news broadcast, and if we don't get one of those topics that I've already mentioned, we're talking about arson, or we're talking about somebody shooting somebody, or somebody drowning, or somebody getting raped, and all these issues, and we just go like, oh yeah. And I feel like we need to go back to, what was Anne Murray did a song, I think it was probably back in the 70s, and it was something like, I just want to hear a story about a country fair. I want to turn on the news and hear some good news. Well, the only reason, or one of the reasons why we have the stories that we do are things that have happened either in recent history or going back in history many, many years ago. If you were to walk through Barnes & Noble or be scanning through Amazon.com and looking for a book, and you came across a book that was called The History of the Stackenwolds, Waltz, most of you probably would pass by that book and not bat an eye. Why? Because you have no idea who the Stackenwolds are. Rightfully so. I'd go by that and I would stop. Because Stackenwolds happens to be my mother's family. That's my mother's maiden name. And so I would pick up the book and I would kind of peruse through, and I would find out about the generations in my family, and I would find out about things that my great-grandparents did when they made the journey from Europe to come over to the United States. And I would look at the good things that have happened. I'd look at all the wonderful siblings and aunts and uncles and that I had, and cousins, and I would get excited about that. And then I would see some of the tragedy that's happened. The loss of children. I would look at things that have happened in the lives of people in our family that have formed and made us think in our family and our traditions the way we do things today. And those things, some of them really, really good. And some of them really, really bad. And some of them really, really, to the point where it literally could have destroyed our family. Now, for you to sit there and read the story, it would be like, okay, that's nice. But for me, it becomes very personal, and I become to understand what that's all about. And I look at what that means. What's it mean to have somebody really influential? To have a member of past generations be involved in the legislature in the state of Pennsylvania, was involved in passing landmark legislation back in the 1800s. Man, that makes me excited. And then to see some of the, dare we say, black sheep in our families. And I wonder. Well, you know, the story, the book that we're going to be going through, the series that we're going to be doing, is very much like that book is for my family. It's a time for us to be able to look at the good things and the bad things that have happened in God's family. To be able to understand exactly what it means to be who we are. For us to be able to grasp what it means. Not just to be the Evangelical Covenant Church in Sloan, and we have a great history, but how about the Evangelical Covenant Church in North America and around the world? And how did that start? As we go back and look at our heritage from our past church roots in Europe. And how does that all make us who we are today? We go through the book, the story, and we see stories about our family patriarch, Abraham, who had a strong faith but made some decisions at times that were just downright foolish. We look at a matriarch, such as Ruth, who, if nothing else, gave us a perfect example of how to be an in-law on Grandparents' Day. How do we be a mother-in-law and father-in-law? We've got a perfect example in our history, in our story, by hearing the story and studying the story of Ruth. We take a look at in our family tree, in our story, we find about a stubborn preacher who God said, go this way, and he goes this way. And we hear a story about how he came back to reconciliation with God in the belly of a fish and realized that he needed to get on the right path. And when he went in and preached the gospel, he still tried to argue with God because he felt as though he knew better. So we learn stories about Jonah. We take a look at someone in our family story that really struggled. I mean, his biggest problem was his big mouth. And as some of us like to joke around, we open our mouth before we engage our brain. Some of us take after Peter real well. We open our mouth and we insert our foot. And sometimes we just open our mouth and change feet. Peter was really good at that. Then we take a look at someone else in our story. We take a look at the story of someone who was so passionate about his particular faith, his particular religion, that he would go out and he would kill the followers of Jesus. And then, in a flash of a light, he completely changed his tone. He went from being a murderer of the faithful to growing and accepting God's grace and becoming a leader of the faithful. These are just not random stories. The story is intertwined, and we are part of that story. You and I are part of the greatest story that was ever told, and it continues to be told today. The story also introduces us to a baby that was born out of wedlock, who was raised in a small town, who grew up and took over his father's business as a laborer. And then at the time where a lot of us are wondering about our first choice of career or our second choice of careers or our third choice of careers, this young man left home, left his business, and went out on the road as a preacher. And he went around and he had a really unique group of followers. I mean, he had drunks, he had prostitutes, he had tax collectors, and he had a few folks that just simply loved to hear his stories. God's story, our story, involves the man Jesus Christ, the one that we have tried to model our church and our lives after his example. We start at the chapter 1, where we look at creation, the creation of the world. And we go all the way through chapter 31, where we see the new creation, where we see what it's like to be new in relationship with God. Learning God's story. What's the journey going to do? It's going to tie us in closer to each other. It's going to tie us in so close to one another that we will look at each other and say, brother and sister. We will be able to relate with the heroes and the not so glamorous in our family tree. The story. It's God's story. It's our story. I would invite you to come along this journey, to come along with this story, to read it, to pick up a book, to read it, to study it, to understand it, to talk about it, and then to invite others and say, come alongside. You may honestly look at a friend and say, I don't know what's going to happen next in this story, and you may not. But it's our story.
This is your story.
This is your story.
This is your story.
This is my story.
This is my story.
This is my story.
But most of all,
This is the greatest story ever told.
This is God's story.
This is God's story.
This is God's story.
I know you're going to enjoy the incredible journey you're about to embark on. The story is brimming over with tales of mystery, intrigue, adventure, of love, heartbreak, and triumph, of power, of struggle, and finally, of redemption. But remember, the Bible is not 100 ancient, unrelated paintings, but a mural all knitted together to tell the story of God's great love for us and the extent to which He will go to get us back. I know you're really going to enjoy and appreciate this wonderful experience as you fully explore how we all fit into the greatest story ever told, God's story.
this is God's story.
This is God's story.
This is God's story.
Let us pray.